I fought cancer for 2 years. Not a single family member was there for me. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not even my grandson. But out of nowhere, my daughter-in-law showed up at my brand new villa on the coast of Maine, which I had inherited from my brother. When I opened the door, I calmly said 3 words, "Glad you could come." Follow my story to the end. 2 years, 730 days, in which I fought for my life while my own family acted as if I were already dead. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I knew what loneliness felt like. I was wrong. True loneliness is sitting in a sterile oncology waiting room, watching other patients surrounded by their children, spouses, and friends, while I just clutched my purse and tried to pretend I wasn't completely alone. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March. Breast cancer. Stage 2. The doctor's words sounded like they were coming from underwater as he explained treatment options, survival rates, and the importance of a strong support system. I nodded and smiled, already knowing I would be fighting this battle alone. My first impulse was to call my son, David. At 38, he had built a seemingly perfect life with his wife, Susan, in their suburban home. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number, trying to figure out how to gently break the news. "Mom, I'm in a meeting," he answered, without a hello. "Can it wait?" "David, I need to tell you something important. I just came from the doctor and..." "Look, whatever it is, can you text me? I've got back-to-back meetings all afternoon." The line went dead before I could get the word cancer out. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried for the first time since my husband died 8 years ago, but not because of the cancer. I was ready to fight. I cried because my own son didn't have 2 minutes to find out that his mother might be dying. The first chemo session was on a Thursday. I had prepared for nausea, fatigue, and hair loss. What I wasn't prepared for was the crushing feeling of walking into that treatment center alone, while every other patient had someone to hold their hand. The nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, noticed immediately. "Is someone coming to pick you up? You really shouldn't drive yourself home after chemo." I lied and said, "My ride is running late." Sarah gave me a look that said she had heard that excuse many times before, but she was too professional to press the issue. 3 hours later, I drove myself home in a daze, clutching the steering wheel. That night, I called David again. This time, Susan answered. "Oh, Barbara," she said in that syrupy sweet voice she used when she wanted something. "David's at the gym. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Susan, I started chemotherapy today. I have breast cancer." First, there was silence. Then, "Oh my God, wow. When did you find out?" 2 weeks ago. I tried to tell David, but, well, you know how busy he is with his promotion and everything. That's just such shocking news. We'll need to process this. Process it, as if my cancer were a business proposal that needed to be reviewed. I was hoping maybe you and David could visit this weekend. I could use the company, and I'd love to see little David. Another pause. This weekend is just a total write-off for us. We have David's work thing, and little David has soccer. Plus, I promised my mom so meeting. But we'll definitely find a time soon. Soon never came. Week after week, I sat in that chemo chair and watched other families go through this journey together. There was Mrs. Williams, whose daughter came down from Boston for every single treatment. There was Mr. Peterson, the baker, whose wife never missed a session and brought him homemade soup every time. And there was me, making small talk with the nurses and pretending I had plans after my treatments. The hair loss started in the 4th week. I woke up to find clumps on my pillow. By noon, I looked like I was molting. I called David from the bathroom, staring at my reflection. "Mom, I told you I have meetings all morning," he grumbled when he picked up. "My hair is falling out, David. All of it. I'm scared." A long sigh. "Look, that's normal with chemo, right? It LL Grobeck. Can I call you Tonicht? We have this presentation for the board and..." "It's fine," I whispered, and hung up. I drove to the wig shop alone. The saleswoman was patient and kind as I tried on synthetic hair that felt nothing like my own. I settled on something that resembled my natural color, paid the $300 I couldn't really afford, and drove home.
I felt like a stranger in my own body.
The worst part wasn't the treatments or the side effects. It was the silence. My phone never rang unless it was a doctor's office or a pollster. The mailbox was empty except for medical bills. No one brought me casseroles or offered to drive me to appointments. No one asked how I was doing or if I needed anything from the grocery store. I started talking to myself just to hear a voice in the house. After 6 months, I had given up on expecting anything from David and Susan. They had sent me a single card, a generic thinking of you card with no personal message, and that was it. No visits, no calls, no acknowledgement that their wife and mother was fighting for her life just 30 minutes away. It was right around then that the letter from my brother Richard's lawyer arrived. I almost threw it away without opening it. Richard and I hadn't spoken in over a year, not since a stupid fight over our mother's inheritance. But something made me tear open the envelope, and the words on the page made my heart stop. Richard had died suddenly of a heart attack, and he had left me everything. Everything was more than I could have ever imagined. The villa in Maine I had visited once as a child, worth over $2 million. Investment accounts I never knew existed. A life insurance policy that made me financially secure for the first time since my husband's death. The irony wasn't lost on me. The brother I had been estranged from for years had shown me more support in death than my own son had during my entire cancer battle. I finished my treatments in February, 18 months after they began. The oncologist used words like remission and excellent response. But I barely heard him. All I could think about were the keys to a villa by the sea, where I could start over, far away from the disappointment of a family that had forgotten I existed. The moving truck came on a Saturday. I packed up 28 years of memories from the house where I had raised David, where I had nursed my husband through his final illness, and where I had fought cancer alone for 2 years. As I loaded the last box, I realized I hadn't heard from my son in over 3 months. The villa by the sea was everything I remembered and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. A kitchen where sunlight actually streamed in. Bedrooms that didn't echo with loneliness. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I had been there for exactly 6 weeks when, on a Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had been careful not to share my new address with David or Susan. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouette of a woman, familiar but unexpected. My heart pounded as I reached for the doorknob. What could possibly bring my daughter-in-law to my doorstep after 2 years of silence? I opened the door to find Susan standing on my new porch as if she had stepped right out of a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her makeup was flawless despite the New England heat, and she wore a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my monthly cancer medication bills. But what struck me most was her smile. That practiced, beaming smile she used at David's company parties and in family photos. The smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Barbara," she exclaimed, spreading her arms as if we were long-lost friends. "Oh my God, you look amazing. I can't believe you didn't tell us about this gorgeous place." I stood in the doorway, not moving to hug her, studying her face. In 10 years of marriage to my son, Susan had visited my old house exactly 7 times, and 4 of those were for Christmas dinner. I had to beg her to come. "How did you find me?" I asked quietly. Her laugh tinkled like a wind chime. "Oh, you know David. He's so good at tracking things down. Can I come in? It's absolutely scorching out here, and I can't wait to see what Richard left you." There it was. Not, "I wanted to see how you are." Or, "I've missed you," or even, "I'm sorry we weren't there when you needed us." She wanted to see what Richard had left me. I stepped aside and let her in. I watched as her eyes immediately started taking inventory of everything. The original hardwood floors that probably cost $50,000 to install, the custom-made teak kitchen island, the crystal chandelier that cast rainbows on the living room walls when the afternoon sun hit it just right. "This is incredible," she gasped, her head swiveling like an owl's as she took in every detail. I had no idea Richard was so wealthy. David always said he was just some eccentric recluse living by the sea. "Coffee?" I offered, more to buy myself time than out of hospitality. "That would be lovely. Thank you." I led her to the kitchen, noticing how she lingered at the ocean view windows, probably calculating the value of the view per square foot. As I prepared the coffee, she perched on one of the bar stools, crossed her legs, and leaned forward with an expression she probably thought was one of concern. "Barbara, I owe you a huge apology," she began, her voice taking on the sincere tone she used when she wanted something. "I know we weren't as present as we should have been during your situation."
Situation.
That's what she called 2 years of chemotherapy, radiation, and fighting for my life. "We were just so overwhelmed with everything," she continued, her hands fluttering dramatically. "David's promotion brought so much stress. Little David was having trouble in school, and my mother was having her own health issues. You know how it is when life just piles on all at once."
I poured the coffee slowly, letting her words hang in the air.
She was painting a picture of a family drowning in obligations, too busy saving everyone else to throw a life raft to the woman who had raised the man she married. "How is little David?" I asked, setting her cup down. "My grandson, now 9 years old, whom I hadn't seen since his 7th birthday. Oh, he's wonderful. Growing like a weed. He's gotten so tall and he's doing amazing in soccer. David is his coach now." She paused, sipping her coffee delicately. "He asks about Grandma Barbara sometimes." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that I might have believed it if I didn't know better. But I did know better. I knew little David probably barely remembered my existence, just as his parents had forgotten me during the most frightening time of my life. "That's nice," was all I said. Susan seemed to sense her first attempt wasn't landing as she'd hoped. She shifted tactics. Her expression grew more serious, more vulnerable. "Barbara, I want you to know that not a day went by during your treatment when we weren't thinking about you. We didn't know how to help. Cancer is so scary, and we felt helpless. We thought maybe it was better to give you space, rather than burdening you with our own anxiety about the situation." I almost laughed. They had given me space. Enough space to make me feel like I was floating alone in a vast, cold universe. "And when we heard about Richard," she continued, shaking her head sadly, "we were devastated that we couldn't be there for you in your grief. But by that time, you had already moved, and we didn't want to intrude on your recovery." "How considerate," I murmured. She leaned forward, placing her hand over mine on the counter. Her fingers were cool and soft, perfectly manicured. No calluses from holding a cancer patient's hand during chemo. No wear and tear from scrubbing floors when someone was too weak to clean their own house. "But we're here now," she said, her smile beaming. "And we want to make up for lost time. This place is absolutely breathtaking. Barbara, you must be so happy here." I watched her eyes drift back to the living room, taking in the original artwork on the walls, the expensive furniture Richard had collected over decades of successful real estate investing. She was calculating, cataloging, appraising everything like an auctioneer. "It's peaceful," I agreed. "I'll bet. And so close to the city but still private. Richard really knew what he was doing when he bought this place. Can I ask you something? I mean, I don't want to be nosy, but David was wondering about the inheritance situation, for tax purposes."
You understand, right?
He's always trying to help with financial planning. There it was, the real reason for this visit. Not concern for my health, not regret for their absence, not love for a mother-in-law they had ignored for 2 years. They wanted to know what Richard had left me and what it meant for their own future inheritance. "Everything has been settled," I said carefully. Of course. Richard was always so organized. But if you need any help navigating the legal stuff, David knows some excellent estate lawyers. And if there are any ongoing property management issues, David and I are happy to help in any way we can." Help. What a generous offer from the woman who couldn't be bothered to help me get to my chemo appointments. "That's very kind of you," I said, my voice neutral. She spent the next hour talking about everything except the 2 years they had abandoned me. She told me about little David's soccer games, the vacation they took to the Caribbean last spring while I was finishing my radiation treatments, and the renovations they were planning for their house. As she talked, I found myself studying her face, trying to understand how someone could be so completely oblivious to their own cruelty. Or maybe she wasn't oblivious. Maybe she had always been exactly like this, and I had just been too naive to see it clearly. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged me tightly. Her perfume was overwhelmingly sweet. "We absolutely must get together more often now that you're settled," she said, pressing her cheek against mine. "Maybe you could have us over for dinner next weekend. Little David would love the beach, and David has been working so hard lately, this would be the perfect place for him to relax." "I'll think about it," I said. "Wonderful. And Barbara," she hesitated at the door, her hand on the frame. "I'm just so glad you're okay. You look healthy and happy, and after everything you've been through, well, it's just wonderful to see you thriving like this." After everything I'd been through. As if my cancer had been some abstract challenge that had nothing to do with them, rather than a battle I had fought without the support of the family that should have been by my side. I watched her drive away in her white BMW, probably already on the phone with David, describing every detail of the house, calculating its value. They had been gone when I needed them most, but now that I had something of value, they were suddenly interested in rebuilding our relationship. I went back inside and stood in my beautiful living room. I looked out at the ocean, glittering in the afternoon light. For the first time since Susan's visit began, I smiled. They had no idea what they were walking into. 3 days after Susan's visit, I was on my porch with my morning coffee when my neighbor, Karen, came over with her golden retriever. Karen was 75, a retired teacher who had lived in the beach community for 30 years. She was one of the first people to welcome me when I moved in, bringing over homemade cookies and offering to water my plants if I ever went away. "You had quite the visitor the other day," she said, sitting in the chair next to mine while Buddy sniffed around the porch. I looked at her curiously. "You met Susan?"
Karens Expression darkend.
"Met her, honey. She cornered me by the mailbox for a solid 20 minutes, asking all sorts of questions about you, about Richard, and about this house. She wanted to know how long you'd been here, if you'd mentioned any financial troubles, and if you'd seemed confused or, what was the word she used? Forgetful lately." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "Forgetful." "She seemed very concerned about your mental state. Said the family had been worried ever since your cancer treatment that you might be showing signs of dementia or making poor decisions. She asked if I'd noticed anything worrisome about your behavior." The words hit me like a physical blow. I set my cup down with a shaking hand. My mind raced. "What did you tell her?" Karen snorted. "I told her you were one of the sharpest people I've ever met and that if she was so concerned about your well-being, maybe she should have been around during the months you were actually sick." She leaned forward and patted my hand. "That woman has a whole lot of nerve, I'll tell you that." After Karen left, I sat on my porch for hours, staring at the ocean, trying to process what I had just learned. Susan hadn't just been appraising my house during her visit, she had been trying to build a case that I was mentally incompetent. The next morning, for the first time since the move, I drove to my old neighborhood. I had to understand what had been happening behind my back during those 2 years of my treatment. I stopped first at the house next to my old one, where Mrs. Miller had lived for 15 years. Mrs. Miller opened the door with a surprised smile. "Barbara, how lovely to see you. You look so healthy and rested. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. Mrs. Miller, can I ask you something? Did anyone ever come by asking about me when I was sick? Any family members?" Her smile faded slightly. "Oh, honey. Yes, your daughter-in-law came by several times. She seemed very worried about you." "How worried?" Mrs. Miller glanced around nervously, as if someone might be listening. "She said the cancer treatments were affecting your memory, that you were making odd decisions and forgetting important things. She asked if I'd noticed you acting confused or paranoid. She even asked if I thought you were still capable of living alone safely." My blood ran cold. "When was this?" "Throughout your treatment, maybe 4 or 5 times over those 2 years. She said the family was considering an intervention. Maybe finding you a nice spot in an assisted living facility where you could get the proper care." I felt sick. While I was fighting for my life, Susan had been systematically building a narrative that I was mentally declining. She had been laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent. "Mrs. Miller, did I ever seem confused to you?
Forgetful.
She looked genuinely baffled. Not at all. You were obviously tired from the treatments, but your mind was always sharp. You handled all your own affairs, drove yourself to appointments, kept your house immaculate. If anything, I was amazed at how composed you remained during such a difficult time. I thanked Mrs. Miller and drove to my old grocery store, where I had shopped for over 20 years. The manager, Mr. Bowman, had always been friendly and had often asked after me during my cancer treatment.
Mrs. Seifert.
Mr. Bowman greeted me warmly. It's so good to see you again. You're looking well.
How do you like your new home?
Very much, thank you, Mr. Bowman. I have a strange question. Did anyone ever come in here asking about me? About my shopping habits or my behavior? His expression grew uncomfortable. Yes, actually. Your son's wife came in several times. She said the family was worried about your mental health after your cancer diagnosis. She wanted to know if we'd noticed you seeming confused, forgetting things, or making unusual purchases. What did you tell her? The truth. That you seemed perfectly normal to me. A little tired sometimes, maybe, but always polite and always knew exactly what you needed. To be honest, she seemed disappointed by that answer. The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying. Susan hadn't just neglected me during my illness, she had been actively working to undermine my credibility, questioning my mental capacity to anyone who would listen. That afternoon, I called my oncologist's office and requested copies of all my medical records. The nurse from Dr. Summers's office, Jessica, had always been very kind to me during treatment. Barbara, of course we can get those for you. Is everything all right? Jessica, did anyone from my family ever call asking about my condition? About side effects or cognitive impacts from the treatment? There was a pause. You know, it's funny you ask. Your daughter-in-law called several times. She was very concerned about potential memory issues or confusion from the chemo. She wanted to know if we had observed any cognitive decline that might affect your ability to make decisions. And what did you tell her? That you showed absolutely no signs of cognitive impairment. In fact, Dr. Summers commented repeatedly on how well-informed and engaged you were in your own treatment. You asked excellent questions, followed instructions perfectly, and managed your care plan better than patients half your age. I hung up, feeling sick to my stomach. The scope of Susan's campaign was becoming clear. She had contacted my neighbors, my grocer, my medical team, trying to find any evidence that I was mentally failing. Since she couldn't find any real evidence, she had apparently decided to invent her own narrative. But why? What was the end game? The answer came the next day, as I was clearing out some boxes from my old house. Buried in a stack of old bills and medical paperwork, I found something that made my blood freeze. It was a copy of a document I had never seen before. A petition for conservatorship.
David Seifert versus Barbara Seifert.
The date was 8 months into my treatment, when I was at my sickest from the chemo. According to the document, David was petitioning the court to be appointed my legal conservator, due to my diminished mental capacity as a result of cancer treatment and advanced age. The petition claimed I was no longer capable of managing my financial affairs or making sound decisions about my medical care. Attached were sworn affidavits from Susan, detailing incidents of my supposed confusion and forgetfulness. She claimed I had forgotten to pay bills, gotten lost on the way to familiar places, and made irrational statements about family members. All lies. The petition had never been filed. At the bottom, there was a handwritten note from someone who must have been a lawyer.
Insufficient evidence of incapacity.
Need medical documentation or witness testimony. Suggest gathering further proof before proceeding. They had been planning to have me declared incompetent. If they had succeeded, David would have controlled all my finances, all my decisions. And when Richard died and left me the house and the investments, they would have controlled that too. I sat in my old bedroom, holding the document with trembling hands, as the full extent of their betrayal washed over me. They hadn't just abandoned me during my cancer battle. They had actively tried to steal my independence and my dignity while I was at my most vulnerable. The cruelest part was that they had almost certainly planned to use my inheritance from Richard to fund their scheme. They would have controlled the villa, the investments, everything. While I lived in whatever nursing home they chose, completely at their mercy. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was David. "Mom, Susan said she had a nice visit with you the other day. She's so thrilled you're doing well." I stared at the conservatorship petition. My son's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. "Yes," I said carefully. It was quite enlightening. "Great. Listen, we'd love to come visit this weekend. Susan thought it would be nice to bring little David to see your new place. Maybe we could all have dinner." They were coming back, crawling out of the woodwork, probably ready to launch phase 2 of their plan. But this time, I would be ready for them. "That sounds wonderful, David. I'd love to see you all." "Perfect. We'll drive up Saturday morning." "Oh, and Mom, Susan mentioned you seem to be settling in really well. It's such a relief to know you're happy and stable." Stable. What an interesting choice of words. "Yes," I said, my voice calm despite the rage building in my chest. "I am, in fact, very stable." Saturday morning arrived with perfect New England weather, and I was ready. I had spent the week preparing for this visit in ways David and Susan couldn't possibly imagine. My lawyer, Miss Shaw, had been very interested in the conservatorship petition I'd found. Very interested indeed. I had also made a few calls to Richard's estate manager, a sharp woman named Sandra Walsh who had handled his affairs for 20 years. That conversation had been enlightening in ways I hadn't expected. "Your brother was very specific about his wishes," Sandra had told me. "He left detailed instructions for what should happen if anyone were to contest your inheritance or question your mental capacity. He was very concerned about potential family interference." That was my brother, Richard. Even in death, he had looked out for me better than my own son. The doorbell rang at 10 a.m. sharp. Through the window, I could see David's black SUV in my driveway. The same car he had driven past my old house countless times during my treatment without stopping. I opened the door to find my son in khaki pants and a polo shirt, clearly dressed for the occasion. Behind him, Susan wore another expensive dress, this time a pale blue. And she was holding little David's hand tightly, as if he might bolt. My grandson had grown tall and lanky, all knees and elbows, with his father's dark hair and serious brown eyes. He looked at me with curiosity rather than recognition, and my heart clenched. This child, who should have been a constant presence in my life, was basically a stranger. "Grandma Barbara," Susan said brightly, pushing little David forward. "Say hello to Grandma Barbara." "Hello," he said quietly, clearly coached. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, crouching down to his level.
"You weh gotten so big."
"How old are you now?" 9, he answered, glancing back at his mother for reassurance. "Come on in, everyone," I said, stepping aside.
"I wie made lunch."
As they entered, I saw David's eyes sweep the room, just as Susan's had on her first visit. But where she had been calculating, he looked almost guilty, as if the knowledge of my comfort and security made him uneasy. "This place is incredible, Mom," he said, his voice strained. "I had no idea Uncle Richard lived so well." "He was very successful," I replied simply. We went to the kitchen, where I had laid out sandwiches and fresh fruit. Little David immediately went to the ocean view windows, pressing his nose against the glass in awe. "Can I go to the beach, Mom?" he asked. "After lunch, honey," Susan said. Then she turned to me with her practiced smile. "Barbara, you've done such lovely things with the place. Have you thought about what you'll do with all this space? It seems like a lot for one person." There it was, not even 20 minutes into the visit. The probing about my ability to handle my new circumstances. "I'm managing just fine," I said, setting glasses of lemonade on the counter. "In fact, I've been thinking of having some guests over. It's been so long since I've had family gatherings." David shifted uncomfortably. "That's great, Mom. You deserve to enjoy yourself after everything."
After everything.
What a convenient way to refer to 2 years of abandonment. "Yes," I agreed. "After everything, I've gained a new perspective on a lot of things." We sat down for lunch, and I let them lead the conversation. Susan chattered about their recent vacation, about little David's academic achievements, and about the new car they were thinking of buying. David talked about his promotion at work, the increased responsibilities, the stress of managing a larger team. "It's been honestly overwhelming," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in obligations."
Everybody needs a meeting from me all the time.
I took a sip of my lemonade, thinking of all the times I had needed something from him during my treatment. All the times he had been too busy, too stressed, too overwhelmed to spare a minute for his dying mother. "That must be difficult," I said calmly. "It is. That's why it's so nice to see you settled and comfortable here."
One less thing to worry about, you know.
One less thing to worry about. As if I had ever been anything more than an item on his to-do list. After lunch, I gave them a tour of the house. Little David was awed by the ocean view from the master bedroom, and he loved the game room Richard had set up in the basement. For a few minutes, watching my grandson discover the ping-pong table and the vintage arcade games, I almost forgot why his parents had really come. Then we went outside to the porch, and Susan began her real work. "Barbara, this is such a wonderful place, but I can't help but worry about you being here all alone. What if something happens? What if you fall or have a medical emergency? There's no one here to check on you." "I have neighbors," I pointed out. "Karen next door has been very kind." "Oh, that's sweet, but neighbors aren't family. And at our age." She paused delicately. "Well, we all have to start thinking more seriously about these things." Our age. Susan was 35 years old. David leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mom, we've actually been talking about that. About your future care needs and planning." "Have you?" "We want to make sure you're protected," Susan continued gently. "Both financially and medically. There are so many decisions to make, and sometimes it helps to have family involved in the planning process." I watched little David playing at the edge of the porch, building something with the driftwood he'd collected, blissfully unaware of the conversation happening behind him. "What kind of decisions?" I asked. David and Susan exchanged a look. "Well, for one, estate planning," David said. "Making sure your affairs are in order. And maybe considering what level of care you might need in the future." "I'm in perfect health," I said. "Of course you are now," Susan agreed quickly. "But cancer survivors sometimes face lingering challenges. Cognitive issues from the chemo, increased risk of other health problems. We just want to make sure you have support systems in place." There it was again, the insinuation that my mind might not be what it used to be. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said. "Especially considering how thoughtful you were during my actual treatment." The words hung in the air like smoke. David flushed, and Susan's smile flickered for just a moment. "Mom, we talked about this," David said quietly. "We know we weren't as present as we should have been. We feel terrible. That's why you're doing this, of course. That's why we want to make sure we're involved now. We don't want to make the same mistakes again." I stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the ocean. Behind me, I could hear them whispering urgently to each other, probably trying to figure out why this conversation wasn't going the way they had planned. "You know," I said, turning back to face them, "I found something interesting when I was packing up the old house."
David Frotze.
"What's that?" I pulled the folded conservatorship petition from my pocket and placed it on the patio table. They both stared at it as if it were a snake. "Would either of you like to explain this to me?" The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Little David, sensing the tension, looked up from his driftwood project with worried eyes. Finally, David cleared his throat. "Mom, that was just a precaution. Our lawyer suggested we explore all options in case your health declined." "Interesting. Because according to this document, you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent 8 months into my treatment. Not because of a health decline, but because of supposed cognitive decline that, according to my medical records, never existed." Susan's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup.
"Barbara, you're misunderstanding.
"We were just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what? From making my own decisions?"
From controlling my own money."
That's not, we would never, David stammered. You would never what? Lie to my neighbors about my mental state? Ask my grocery store manager if I seemed confused? Call my doctor's office trying to find evidence that I was incompetent? They stared at me in shock. They had no idea I knew about their campaign to undermine me. How did you, Susan whispered. How did I know that you spent 2 years telling anyone who would listen that I was losing my mind? That you were building a case to steal my independence while I was fighting for my life? David found his voice. Mom, it wasn't like that. We were worried. And the lawyer said. The lawyer said you needed more evidence because you didn't have any. Because I wasn't incompetent then, and I'm not incompetent now.
I leaned forward, my voice deeply calm.
But you know what I am? I'm rich. Richard left me over $2 million in assets, and suddenly, after 2 years of silence, you're supposedly concerned for my welfare. That's not fair, Susan said, her voice trembling. We're here because we love you. I laughed. A laugh with no humor in it at all.
A laugh?
You want to know what love looks like? Love looks like showing up for chemo appointments. Love looks like bringing over soup when someone is too sick to cook. Love looks like calling on the bad days just to say, I'm thinking of you. Little David had stopped playing and was watching us with wide, frightened eyes. Love, I continued, does not look like plotting to have your own mother declared incompetent so you can control her money. We never filed it, David said desperately. We changed our minds. You changed your minds because your lawyer told you you didn't have a case. But you kept the paperwork, didn't you? Just in case. They had no answer for that. I picked up the petition and folded it carefully. Well, I have news for you both. This house, Richard's investments, all of it comes with very specific legal protections. If anyone questions my mental capacity or tries to interfere with my inheritance, there are consequences.
What kind of consequences?
Susan asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, it felt real. The kind that would make your current financial problems look like a minor inconvenience. David and Susan left 20 minutes later, taking a confused and upset little David with them. As I watched their SUV disappear down my driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. The calls started that evening. First, David called. His voice was tense with barely controlled panic. Mom, we need to talk. Can we come back tomorrow? I think everything that needed to be said was said today. Please, we can explain everything. You're misunderstanding the situation. I almost laughed. After showing them concrete proof of their plot to have me declared incompetent, he thought the problem was my misunderstanding. David, I understand perfectly. You and Susan spent 2 years plotting to steal my independence while I fought cancer alone. There's nothing complicated about that. It wasn't stealing. We were trying to help. Help?
By lying to my neighbors?
By telling my doctor's office I was showing signs of dementia? By preparing legal documents to have me declared mentally unfit. Silence. Then, in a smaller voice, how did you find all that out? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know exactly who you and your wife really are. The second call came an hour later, from Susan. This time, her mask was completely gone. Gone was the sweet voice, the concerned daughter-in-law facade. Her voice was sharp, desperate. Barbara, you can't be seriously thinking of cutting us off over some old paperwork that was never even used. Oh, but I am. We're family. We made mistakes, yes, but families forgive each other.
And little David adores you.
You wouldn't really punish an innocent child for his parents' mistakes, would you? There it was, the guilt card played with precision. Using my love for my grandson to manipulate me into accepting their betrayal. Susan, in the 2 years I was sick, how many times did you bring little David to see me? We've been over this. We were busy and we thought. 0. The answer is 0. You used my grandson as a weapon today, bringing him into an adult conversation to make me feel guilty. But you never once considered what was best for him, including having a relationship with his grandmother. That's not true. When was his last soccer game? The question threw her. What? You mentioned he's doing amazing in soccer and David is coaching his team. When was his last game? I think it was last weekend. You think? You don't know when your own son's soccer games are, but you expect me to believe you were protecting him from his unstable grandmother. More silence. What do you want from us then? I want you to leave me alone. We can't do that. We won't do that. We're family, whether you like it or not. No, I said quietly. Family shows up when you need them. Family doesn't plot against you when you're vulnerable. Family doesn't lie to your neighbors and doctors to build a case to steal your independence. I hung up before she could respond. The third call came at 11 p.m. It was David again, and I could hear Susan in the background coaching him. Mom, we're coming over tomorrow. We need to sort this out face to face. No. What do you mean, no? I mean you are no longer welcome here. You can't just cut off your family like this. Watch me. But I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. People like David and Susan don't accept defeat gracefully, especially not when $2 million is on the line. They showed up the next afternoon anyway, this time without little David. I watched from my window as they parked in my driveway and marched up to my front door as if they owned the place. The doorbell rang incessantly. I didn't answer. Mom, we know you're in there. David yelled through the door. We need to talk. I sat calmly in my living room, reading a book, while they pounded on my door and shouted threats and pleas through the windows. After 20 minutes, they gave up and left. But not before Susan screamed one last message. This isn't over, Barbara. We won't let you destroy this family. That evening, I called my lawyer, Miss Shaw, and explained the situation. She listened without interruption, taking notes. Based on what you've told me about the conservatorship petition and their behavior, I think we need to put some protections in place, she said when I finished. People willing to plot against a cancer patient aren't going to respect a simple "leave me alone." What kind of protections? A restraining order, for starters. We have good grounds based on harassment and the attempted conservatorship fraud. I'll also recommend security cameras for your property and an updated will that explicitly excludes them from any inheritance. They're already excluded from my will. Good, but we need language that makes it clear that any attempt to contest your will or question your mental capacity will have additional consequences. Richard was smart to build protections into your inheritance, but we can strengthen them. The next week was a flurry of legal preparations. Miss Shaw worked quickly to secure the restraining order, and I had a security system installed that would make Fort Knox envious. Every approach to my property was monitored, every conversation recorded. I also called little David's school, not to interfere, but to understand exactly what kind of parents I was dealing with. The picture that emerged was disturbing, but not surprising. Susan was a classic helicopter mom, the type to show up at every school event with a camera, needing to control every detail. David was largely absent, too busy with work to attend most school functions. Their son was polite but withdrawn, his teacher said. He was bright but anxious, the kind of child who had learned early that love came with conditions and that disappointing the adults in his life had serious consequences. My heart broke for him, but I knew that trying to save him would only give David and Susan another weapon to use against me. The restraining order was served on a Thursday. Miss Shaw called to tell me it had been delivered to them both at home, while little David was presumably watching. How did they react? I asked. About as well as you'd expect. Susan threw the papers in the process server's face and screamed that you were a vindictive old woman trying to destroy her family. David threatened to fight it in court. Let them try. But I knew this was far from over. Desperate people do desperate things, and David and Susan were running out of options. The breaking point came the following Saturday. I was working in my garden when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the hedge, I could see Susan marching toward my front door, her face contorted with rage. She hammered on the door so hard I was afraid she would break the glass.
Barbara, you open this door right now.
We need to sort this out. I stayed in my garden, continuing to plant the flowers I'd bought at the nursery that morning. The security cameras were recording everything. "I know you're out there," she screamed.
You can't hide from your family forever.
Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of breaking glass. I immediately called 911. 911, what is your emergency? Someone just broke into my house. I have a restraining order against them, and she just violated it. The police arrived within 6 minutes. By then, Susan had apparently realized the gravity of her mistake. I found her sitting in my living room, surrounded by shards of glass from the window she'd smashed, crying hysterically. "She's my family," she sobbed to the police officer. "She's trying to destroy us. All we ever wanted was to help her." The officers were professional but firm. Breaking and entering, violation of a restraining order, destruction of property. Susan was arrested and led away in handcuffs, still screaming about family loyalty and my mental instability. David arrived an hour later, just as the police were finishing their report. I watched from my window as he talked urgently with the officers, gesturing wildly, probably trying to explain that his wife was just upset and didn't mean any harm. The lead officer came to my door before they left. "Ma'am, we have everything documented and will be filing a full report. Your security footage will be valuable evidence if this goes to trial. Is there anything else you need from us tonight?" "Just some peace and quiet," I said.
Unterstot.
"And ma'am, you might want to consider changing your locks, just in case." After the police left, I stood in my living room, looking at the broken window, and felt something I didn't expect. Sadness. Not for David and Susan, but for the family I thought I had. For the son who had once been a sweet little boy who brought me dandelions and told me I was the best mom in the world. For the daughter-in-law who had once seemed genuinely happy to be joining our family. That night, I got one last call from David. "Mom, please. Susan's in jail. They're saying she could face felony charges. Our lawyer says if you drop the charges, she might get probation and community service instead of prison." "And why would I do that?" "Because we're family. Because everyone makes mistakes. Because this has gone far enough." I looked out my window at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the rocks below my house, constant, relentless, wearing down anything that stood in their way. "Marcus, do you remember when I was diagnosed with cancer?" "Of course." "Do you remember what you said to me when I called to tell you?" Silence. "You said you were in a meeting and asked if I could text you instead. Your mother was diagnosed with cancer, and you couldn't spare 2 minutes to talk to her." "Mom, Do you remember the day I started chemotherapy? The day I sat in that chair for 3 hours, having poison pumped into my veins, fighting for my life?" "Yes." "Where were you that day?" More silence. "You were at your son's soccer game. The same child you claim I'm hurting now by holding your wife accountable for breaking into my house. That's not fair. You had 2 years to show me that family mattered. 2 years to prove that I was worth a phone call, a visit, a moment of your time. Instead, you spent those 2 years plotting to have me declared incompetent so you could control my money. We never meant for it to go this far. You meant for it to go exactly as far as it did. And now you want me to save your wife from the consequences of her own actions because we're family. The same family that abandoned me when I needed you most." I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. "What can we do?" he whispered. "How can we make this right?" For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost.
Some things can't be made right, David.
Some betrayals are too deep, some wounds too raw. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't worth your time. Now, I'm making mine. Please don't do this. I've already done it. I hung up the phone and turned it off. Outside, the sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful, peaceful, perfect. And it was mine. 6 months later, I was on my porch watching the sunrise when Karen came over with her morning coffee and a small wrapped gift. "Happy birthday, Barbara," she said, sitting in the chair next to mine. 63 looks good on you. I had forgotten it was my birthday. For 63 years, birthdays had been calls from family, awkward dinners where everyone pretended to be closer than they were, and obligatory gifts that showed how little thought anyone had put into knowing me. This year, I had simply forgotten to mark the date. "Thank you," I said, taking the gift. Inside was a small ceramic bird, hand-painted in shades of blue and green that perfectly matched the ocean view from my porch. "I made it in my pottery class," Karen explained. "The teacher said to give it to someone who brings me joy. You were the first person I thought of."
Tears pricked my eyes.
When was the last time someone had given me a gift just because they wanted to, not out of obligation or expectation? "Karen, this is beautiful. But you barely know me." She laughed, a warm sound that mixed with the rush of the waves below. "Honey, I've lived next to you for 8 months. I've watched you create that beautiful garden from nothing. I've seen you on your porch reading at sunrise every morning, peaceful and content. I saw you help Mrs. Kim with her groceries and offer to watch the Moya's dog when they went away." She paused, sipping her coffee. "I know you better than some people know their own family." The irony was not lost on me. My neighbor of a few months knew me better than my son and daughter-in-law did after decades. "Have you heard from them?" Karen asked gently. She knew the basics of what had happened, though I'd spared her the most painful details.
"No.
The restraining order is in effect for another year, and Susan's court case is still pending. David hired an expensive lawyer, but breaking and entering is hard to explain away, especially with video evidence." "Do you miss them?" It was a question I had been asking myself for months. Did I miss the son who had once been the center of my world? Did I mourn the family unit that had never really existed? "I miss who I thought they were," I said finally. "I miss the idea of having a family that loves me unconditionally. But the reality of it? No. I don't miss being treated like an obligation or a burden." That afternoon, for the first time since the confrontation, I drove to my old neighborhood. I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to go, but something pulled me back to the life I had left behind. The house looked smaller than I remembered, with a "for sale by owner" sign in the front yard that had clearly been there for months. The lawn was overgrown, and several of the blinds were broken. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I parked across the street and sat in my car, remembering the 27 years I had spent in that house. The Christmas mornings when David was little, tearing open presents with the excitement only children can muster. The quiet evenings after my husband died, when the silence felt overwhelming. The long nights during chemo when I sat alone in the living room, too sick to sleep but too tired to do anything else. Mrs. Miller came out to get her mail and spotted me. She walked over, her expression concerned. "Barbara, how lovely to see you. You look so healthy and happy. How are you?" "Much better, thank you. Mrs. Miller, is David's house for sale?" Her expression darkened. "Oh honey, they lost it about 3 months ago. Foreclosure." I heard David lost his job shortly after that. Well, after all that trouble with the police, I guess his company didn't appreciate the negative publicity. I felt a pang of something that might have been guilt, followed by the memory that David had brought this on himself. "Where are they living now?" "I'm not sure. I heard they moved in with Susan's mother, but you know how rumors are. That poor little boy though. I see him sometimes when David picks him up for visits. He always looks so sad." Little David. In all this mess, he was the only truly innocent victim. A 9-year-old boy whose world had been turned upside down by his parents' greed and manipulation. "Visits?" I asked. "Oh, you didn't know? David and Susan separated about 2 months ago. She's living with her mother, and he has little David on the weekends. The divorce is pretty nasty, apparently." I drove home with a hollow feeling. Their marriage, their financial security, their comfortable suburban life. It had all crumbled in the aftermath of their plot against me. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. That evening, I looked through old photo albums, the one thing I had brought from the house. Pictures of David as a baby, a toddler, a little boy with gapped teeth and scraped knees. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, school plays. All the moments that had made me believe we were a real family. But looking at them now, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way I was slightly separate from the others in every family photo. The way David wasn't quite looking at the camera. A subtle distance that I had written off as normal awkwardness but now recognized as something deeper. The signs had been there all along. I had just been too desperate for connection to see them clearly. My phone rang, pulling me from my reverie. I almost didn't answer when I saw it was an unknown number, but something made me pick up. Grandma Barbara? My heart stopped. It was little David. His voice was small and uncertain. Sweetheart, how did you get this number? I found it in Dad's phone. Are we really not allowed to see each other anymore? I closed my eyes, trying to figure out how to explain adult failings to a child who shouldn't have to understand them.
It's complicated, honey.
Your parents and I had some disagreements about grown-up things. Dad says you're trying to punish us because you're angry. But Mom says you never really loved us anyway and you're just showing your true colors now. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Even in the midst of their own crisis, they were poisoning their child against me. Little David, listen to me very carefully. I love you very much. I always have, and I always will. The problems between your parents and me have nothing to do with you, and they have nothing to do with my love for you. Then why can't I see you? Because sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, and then there are consequences for those choices. Your parents made some choices that hurt me very badly, and now we can't be together. Will it ever get better? I thought about that question for a long time. Would it ever get better? Could David and Susan ever acknowledge what they'd done and sincerely apologize? Could I ever trust them enough to let them back into my life? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so, but I honestly don't know. I miss you, Grandma Barbara. I miss your house and playing in your yard. I miss the way you made pancakes in funny shapes. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I remembered all the moments we had shared before his parents decided I was worth more to them as a victim than as family.
I miss you too, my little one.
So much.
Dad's coming back.
I have to go. But Grandma? Yeah? I don't believe what Mom said. I know you love me. The line went dead, and I sat in my living room, sobbing for the little boy caught in the middle of his parents' destruction. A year passed. I found a routine that brought me a peace I had never known.
Morning coffee on the porch.
Tending my garden. Reading by the sea. Long walks on the beach with Karen and Buddy. I joined a book club, took a pottery class, volunteered at the animal shelter. For the first time in my adult life, my days were my own. No one needed anything from me. No one was disappointed in me. No one was plotting against me. The silence that once felt oppressive now felt like freedom. I learned that David had taken a job in Portland. A significant step down from his former position, but apparently the only offer he could get after the legal trouble. Susan had moved back to her hometown near Cleveland with little David, and the custody battles were ongoing. They had destroyed not only their relationship with me but also their relationships with each other. The greed that had driven them to plot against me had ultimately consumed everything they were supposedly protecting. On the second anniversary of my cancer diagnosis, I did something I had been planning for months. I drove to the Children's Hospital where I had received part of my treatment and wrote them a check for $50,000 to fund a support program for cancer patients without family support. "This is incredibly generous," the development director said as I handed her the check. "May I ask what inspired this particular donation?" "I fought cancer alone for 2 years," I said simply. "No one should have to do that." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt something I had been searching for my entire adult life. Wholeness. Not because I had a family that loved me, but because I had finally learned to love myself enough to walk away from people who didn't. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching another perfect sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The ocean stretched out before me, a constant and reliable friend in a way people never could be. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Wine on the porch tomorrow night. The gardeners want to come over, and I'm making my famous cheese board." I smiled and texted back, "I'll bring dessert." This was my family now. Not the one I was born or married into, but the one I had chosen. People who showed up when they said they would, who remembered my birthday, who offered help with no expectation of anything in return. People who saw me not as an obligation or a resource to be managed, but as someone worth knowing, worth caring for, worth loving. At 63, I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. The price of absence is ultimately paid by those who choose not to be present. David and Susan had traded their place in my life for a chance at my money, and they had lost both. But I had gained something infinitely more valuable than anything they could have ever taken from me. I had gained myself. Now I wonder, what would you who are hearing my story do? Would you act as I did? Have you ever gone through something similar? Write it in the comments. In the meantime, on the final screen, I have 2 more stories that are among the channel's favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching this far.